Climate and Energy Program for the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, or VPIRG. Hopefully you've heard of it. With me today, we have Senator Mark McDonald, Senator Bray, and Representative Deanna Gonzalez. I'm going to introduce each of them just a little bit more in a moment, but as the facilitator, I'm going to take the liberty of setting the table a little bit for today's discussion. So we're going to be getting into the legislative lay of the land, some of the priorities that these three elected officials have for the coming year, and given their positions, their priorities are going to largely reflect what we will be seeing this coming legislative session. I'll be touching on a couple of other elements of energy policy that are coming from other folks who were not able to be here today. But first I just wanted to briefly touch on sort of where we are in the history of energy policy in this country. This is not the same world that we were at 2 years ago when VECAN came together here right after the Clean Power Plan was finalized and as it was headed towards implementation. It's not even the same world that we were in 1 year ago when Donald Trump had just been elected president, but the substantive threats that he manifested were still prospective. They were still potential threats, and there was still some glimmer of hope that maybe the worst of what he was presenting was not actually going to be coming true. And now here we are a year later, and surprise, he kept all of his bad promises and none of his good ones. And what that's meant on energy, obviously, has been attack after attack after attack. I won't get into the EPA and climate deniers and scrubbing their websites and all of that, but just as one example of the hits keep on coming, just this week, just 2 days ago, the administration in DC announced that they're going to be attacking the appliance efficiency standards that have been in place and put in place in both Democratic and Republican administrations for decades now. So there literally is nothing that they will not go after from a climate or energy standpoint. From most standpoints, but that's more what we're here to talk to you about today. So our organization, and I know all of us believe this in one way or another, in our own way, believes that our role as an organization, as individuals, as a state, is to fight back. Now, sometimes that means explicitly opposing particular policies or narratives that are being advanced by the Trump administration. A lot of other times what that means is fighting back by being better, by doing more as a state, by saying, this is what we can accomplish, this is what we can do, this is what we can be as a nation, and saying, we know that the tide will turn in DC. We don't know exactly when that will happen, but when it does, there needs to be an example at the state level of how to do things better, and Vermont can play that role. The last thing I'll mention before turning it over to our other panelists is, as you heard this morning, Vermont has lofty goals. Vermont has goals that are, I would argue, the bare minimum of what we could have, and those two things are true at the same time. These are very difficult goals that are absolutely essential. And right now, we're not on track to hit them. I don't need to belabor all of the numbers. Linda McGinnis got into a lot of that this morning, but at the end of the day, if we don't take additional substantial action as a state, we're not going to come anywhere close. There are some good signs, despite the upward tick in greenhouse gases in recent years in Vermont. Other policies like Act 56, the renewable energy standard, have just come into place, and we expect those to result in quite significant reductions in greenhouse gases, but still nowhere near where we need to be. So we have our work cut out for us. We need to pass at least a few more really big policies, along with a whole lot of smaller pieces to make this puzzle of 90% and eventually 100% renewable energy work as a state and as a country. So I'll leave it there. You'll be hearing from me briefly in a moment on a couple of those small pieces. But for the moment, I want to turn it over to Senator Bray. He's the chair of the Senate Natural Resources Committee. Under his leadership, Vermont passed our renewable energy standard. our energy siting policy reform, and the landmark clean water legislation from a couple of years ago. So he really has been integral in some of the most significant policies that we have on the books from energy and climate and environmental standpoints. Take it away, Chris.
Thank you, Ben. I'm going to stand up because this stuff all feels too vital to me to be sitting there, and want to be able to speak a little more loudly than I can sitting in a chair. Because if we needed extra motivation, the tax bill that just passed in the last 24 hours includes opening the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge for oil drilling. So there's motion going the wrong direction out of state. But I remain hopeful about what we're doing in Vermont. I'd say we have a lot to celebrate in terms of what we've already done, in terms of we have a successful net metering program that was remodeled under Act 99. We're still seeing additions into net metering programs. It's not sufficient, but there are sunny days in the summer in Vermont where about 40% of the state's power is coming out of solar. So I think we're only second to Hawaii at moments like that in terms of generating our own power. But that's not a year-round figure. So, but it is an encouraging figure for how things are performing part of the time. But we still need opportunities to help more Vermonters generate their own clean energy and to make it more affordable. So I'll come back to that in terms of a bill. So we have Act 90, we have net metering rolling on. We have Act 56, our renewable energy standard that just came online January 1 of this past year. It says, you know, our electrical generation portfolio for all the utilities, the municipalities get a little lag start on this, but for all utilities, start at 55% and needs to go to 75% by 2032. I was at a conference this summer where I was talking to some legislators from Western states, and they were working hard to try to get a renewable energy standard that would aim for 15% by 2020. So every state's unique, they have unique challenges, but if you compare, Vermont's starting at 55 and we're heading for 75. And we already have 2 utilities that are 100% renewable. So that's a great story to encourage ourselves with, and it also means that it's very doable and we can do more. Within Act 56, there's Tier 3, which is kind of the maker space of energy projects. It says that utilities will have the opportunity to reduce greenhouse gas, or just not the opportunity, an obligation to reduce greenhouse gases. They don't have to do it just on the generation side. They can also get involved in thermal and transportation projects in order to achieve those. So electricity is getting outside of its own box and into the 2 other main ways we use energy, transportation and thermal. So there's going to be a lot of interesting, it's kind of a new sandbox, a new maker space, and there'll be a lot happening in the next decade. As you recall, we had, for the past 3 years, we had a lot of fights, I would just call them that, over where we're going to do renewable energy projects. And we now have in place Act 174 there's a statewide energy plan, there are regional energy plans, and there are town energy plans. And it's an early stage, but what we're seeing is that the 90 by 2050 vision is percolating down and percolating up. And we're engaging people at the right levels so that we can do energy the way that a town wants to do it. We share the same endpoint, but how we get there will vary location. So that's an encouraging thing because we don't need extra friction slowing us down in terms of making progress. In the current biennium, so we're halfway through a 2-year biennium, we have an energy planning bill in Senate Natural. I'm going to speak just about things I know about. I know there are more things coming, but the only thing I can speak about with confidence is what we either have in committee, I'll be introducing. I'll be counting on you folks and other legislators to be bringing other ideas forward. So let me add that caveat up front. But an Energy Planning Act. So right now, we do a lot of, I would say, planning on the fly. Best ideas come forward, but we don't necessarily have a systematic way for the Energy Committee to see the lowest hanging fruit in the three main uses, so electrical, transportation, and thermal. And this simply tasks the Department of Public Service to say, look at our most current comprehensive energy plan. If we want to be on a trajectory to meet that plan, please identify for us the biggest opportunities in those three ways we use energy. And it'll create a flow of information that will help us be a well-informed, more methodical, long-term oriented energy committee. Energy labeling, so you know, you go out and buy an appliance, you go buy a car, you know what its energy use is. You go buy a house, it's anybody's guess, unless you go through bills with someone, and even then you're not necessarily sure what those bills are telling you. It may not be all the bills. So an energy labeling program says, let's create an MPG equivalent for homes, just so that you can make, you know, let the marketplace work better by letting people buying a home have a sense of all their costs that they'll have. In terms of new bills, I mentioned net metering, and so I'm introducing a new community energy program to build 250 megawatts more of renewable energy in the state of Vermont, and to make it available to all Vermonters across all customer classes, ranging from residential and municipalities to schools, hospitals, commercial and industrial customers. And I'd say, you know, the program is a blend in a certain way. It combines the steadiness of a standard offer contract with the individualized sort of outreach that net metering programs, net metering customers have enjoyed. So I'll leave it at that high level, but 250 megawatts and available to from 150 kW all the way on up to 5 megawatts is the basic shape of it. Enhanced support for so electric vehicles. So what does that mean? Things like waiving the purchasing use or sales tax on the first $30,000 when you're buying an EV, first 15 on a hybrid, to reduce the cost of ownership up front. Responding to the charges that people with EVs are freeloading by setting a modest fee that collected will roll into supporting the build-out of EV infrastructure. And over time, we'll shift to the transportation fund. But for now, I think there are so few users, it would be a good time to nip that legitimate complaint at an early stage, and then be able to use the proceeds to actually help the build-out of EVs. Smaller things, but making parking in the spot of a EV charging station a ticketable offense. Clarify that someone who wants to sell electricity at a charging station does not have to become legally a utility. And working with the PUC to develop rate plans that make EV charging even more affordable. A third bill is on biofuels. Without changing any equipment in the state of Vermont, we could reduce fossil fuel use for thermal by 20% if everyone went to B20. That is a blend of heating fuel that included sustainably sourced biodiesel as up to 20% of it. You don't have to change the equipment. It already can burn that fuel. And there are some marketplace and maybe legal obstacles in the way of letting that opportunity come through. It doesn't compel anyone to do it, but it creates a marketplace that could embrace that opportunity. And then the last one I'll talk about is full cost accounting for fuels. So right now it says that, in short, any energy bill in electricity, thermal, transportation should include an assessment of the social cost of its externalities. We can't make prudent policy choices when we only see part of the value proposition in the accounting of any program. So for instance, recently at a joint energy committee hearing, so I have to validate these numbers to see how they did them, but it's an example. It's the American Lung Association working through its Vermont chapter estimated tailpipe emissions caused $357 million more of medical expense in the state of Vermont. So given that we all have only one wallet and we're paying for everything out of that one wallet. Why segregate just our energy costs from our healthcare costs? It could turn out that the move to more EVs, for instance, would actually be cheaper. It might be more expensive compared to a fossil fuel alternative at the moment, but if you factored in healthcare impacts or other social costs, that it would be a cheaper choice. And then you end up taking some of the fight out of the discussion and saying whether you embrace environmental stewardship or not, from a fiduciary responsibility point as a legislator, you ought to work for policy that helps Vermont make its best financial choices as well as health choices and environmental choices. So there are there's a lot of work coming our way this session. Those are 4 bills, and my colleagues in the House and Senate are all working on things as well. So I think it's, sometimes the second half of a biennium is quiet. I think this is going to be a very lively second half, and I anticipate we're going to get some good work done between now and May. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to, again, as I mentioned, speak just for another probably 2 minutes to mention a couple of the other discrete bills that Senator Bray alluded to. There are, today, as maybe probably a few of you know, the House Democratic caucus is caucusing. That means they're all up at the State House in Montpelier and so aren't here. Representative Gonzalez is from the Progressive Caucus, and so we were lucky enough to be able to recruit her to come here. I mentioned that just by way of saying there's one thing in particular I wanted to mention that's going to be coming up in House Energy, and because of that caucus, we couldn't bring anyone from House Energy here to speak to this. That is a bill on appliance efficiency. So very briefly, last legislative session, Vermont passed a law that basically said federal appliance efficiency standards. These are like the bare minimum efficiency for things like refrigerators or water heaters, etc. If those go away at the federal level, because hypothetically the Trump administration wanted to kill them, they would still remain in effect here in Vermont, and you would not be able to sell these inefficient appliances in Vermont, even if you could in other places. And essentially, this was a consumer protection thing for Vermonters, and it was also something that we worked on, and we were excited that the legislature passed, because having individual states take that action makes it less likely that the federal government will actually repeal or roll back these standards. There is real action happening in other parts of New England, and a number of states out west are looking at this kind of legislation as well. California already had it on the books. And so this year, what we're doing in Vermont is actually looking at a new set of standards, about 20 additional standards that have not happened at the federal level yet, that Vermont could adopt on a variety of products. So the current federal standards save Vermonters about $550 a year in energy costs, both heating and electric. It's the largest program from a climate standpoint that the federal government has outside of the fuel efficiency standards for cars. And it's really been adopted over time as states have gone further, and then the federal government has caught up, and states have gone further and adopted new standards, and the federal government's caught up. And so Vermont is hopefully going to be the first state to pass this additional set of standards. Some of them are already in effect, again, out in California. And by 2035, these new standards would be saving Vermonters roughly $90, $100 a year, in addition to that $550 that's already on the books in energy costs. Be something like a $200 million net life cycle value for these investments. So big potential upside, and again, this is something we're working with Chris Granda from the Appliance Standards Efficiency Awareness Project on, and a number of other states are looking at these as well. So our hope is Vermont can get this passed, a number of other states can get this passed. It'll be good for our consumers in the short run, and then when sanity again reigns in Washington, D.C., it'll actually happen at the federal level as well, and this is something that will benefit all Americans. The other thing that I want to mention very briefly is Efficiency Vermont. They actually just yesterday announced the energy efficiency charge for the coming year. It's being cut by 5% on average, which exactly what the rate is going forward depends on your customer class. Basically, residential is flat, commercial and industrial are going down. And that's really exciting because it's the first time that Efficiency Vermont has said we're going to be holding our services steady but at a decreasing cost. Efficiency Vermont saving Vermonters had, just from investments that already happened, about $500 million over the life of those investments. Every dollar invested there results in $2+ in savings. So I mention that because historically, just the last few sessions, Efficiency Vermont's had a bit of a bullseye on their back, as large business interests would like to see their investments cut, despite the fact that they're good for Vermont and Vermonters as a whole. And in terms of specific actions you can take in the near term to help with that, Digger put an article out on this, which was a little bit slanted, unfortunately, and some folks who aren't so into climate action came out in the comment section. So if you want to wade into that morass, we could really use a couple of good comments saying Efficiency Vermont's great. It's on their homepage. So with that, and I will wrap up on the smaller actions and turn it over to Representative Gonzalez to talk about one big thing that we can and should do as a state. This is a policy that VPIRG is very supportive of. And I'll just say Representative Gonzalez is a progressive representative from Winooski, is a passionate champion for environmental justice, and I hope you don't mind me saying, I think is a bit of an up-and-comer in the House, so somebody to watch.
Yay!
And I think you two gentlemen might need to move out of the way.
I forgot about that part of the...
That's what happens when you have up-and-comers.
So who here earlier today heard about the Essex Plan? Raise your hand if you heard. Okay, fantastic. So lots of folks have heard about that. So what is the Essex Plan?
Carbon tax.
Carbon tax? Yeah, pricing carbon. I would say pricing carbon pollution. Do you have a hand up?
But only fossil carbon pollution.
Yes, so it is not everything.
And reducing electric rates for all Vermonters.
And reducing electric rates for Vermonters.
Can we say,
Yes.
if they don't reduce the rates, there's a rebate? There's a rebate, that's right.
Yeah, there's a rebate. Okay, what else? So there's some other things maybe that folks know about it. I would say that's the broad scope of it. So it really is looking at how to reduce energy costs by providing a rebate through carbon pollution pricing. So instead of the costs of pollution being socialized, being externalized, and we all pay for it, at the point of purchase, individuals who are choosing to use carbon, that they are paying the price of that pollution, the social cost of that pollution at that moment. So this has been a plan that has been developed with a ton of stakeholders, as the folks of you who have heard it already know. So I'm going to go through the Essex Plan but quickly, because most of the people raised their hand in here that you've seen it already and you've already been able to respond back of what it is. So these 2 points of electricity, the lowest costs, and our strong economy are very important. So when we are looking at our competitors in terms of economics, that having the lowest electricity rates or electricity costs can be a huge benefit to our economy. When we look at our surrounding states, we can be more competitive, and we can draw more folks here that we can create a stronger economy. And by having our money generate back into Vermont, we also increase jobs, we also increase our economy. And the plan, as you all heard it, also accounts for low-income Vermonters and rural Vermonters. And the whole reason that we're here today at this conference is really looking at our energy pollution and looking at what are ways that we can save our planet. And we really need to reduce our carbon pollution in order to do that. I guess the other thing that I want to say about it is that this is one piece. You've already heard, I think I heard 6 different policies that we're working on in the State House this coming session. And this is one of many pieces that we're just doing in the State House, and one of many pieces that we are doing collectively, that you all are in your places. And so wanting to keep that perspective that this is one of many things. So you all kind of said this already, so I'm not going to go through every single thing, but remind folks for the things that you saw this morning, as well as if you didn't see them, or yes.
To be factual, you don't really wanna use the word rates there, right? You wanna use total cost, because the rebate,
You are correct.
if it's a per business rebate or something, it may
Yes.
not be that big compared to their electric that he used, right?
Well,
It's not based on use.
you are correct that that is incorrect. That it's not rates, but as you pointed out, rebates. And so the cost of it's the cost of electricity, but not the rate of the electricity.
But it's a per kilowatt hour,
But it's a per kilowatt hour.
so it's kind of.
Oh, so it is gonna be based on use to some extent, because it's per kilowatt hour use.
Can I just
Yes.
jump in and suggest, hold questions until the end. I believe some of these things will be to some degree addressed. And then we're gonna do a Q&A with all four panelists, so we'll be able to get into all of this.
So also looking at the lowest rates in the region, which talked about, and so kind of bringing these pieces and lowering by 27% is a huge amount. Again, that by keeping our money here instead of by sending it elsewhere, we strengthen our economy. It's a very high number. And so this bit is the breakdown of at the high points of usage. So it's a tiered plan. So it comes in at starts at $5 a barrel and goes to $40 a barrel. And that high point of $40 is what the social costs of carbon pollution is based upon an Obama administration study. And so that's where we're going towards, so that the pollution that we're creating and all the health costs, all the education costs, all of the infrastructure costs that are associated with climate change and pollution, that we are accounting for those in that. So average bill, or an example bill, I should say. And then this is the proportion that everyone would get. So this is the amount that everyone would get. And then say this person is also 400% above the poverty line, depending upon household and region and all that. This would be what they would additionally get. And then if they live rurally, to account for the transportation costs, they would get an additional under this current plan, bringing their balance significantly down. So you may have seen this multiple times, perhaps not. It's a really good thing to remind yourself about the statutory goals. So Vermont is really unique in all kinds of ways, and one of them is that we have put, as you've already heard, that we have statutory goals around carbon pollution. However, we're not really doing what we need to do in order to get there. So this is what actually has happened, and this is our trend if we don't do anything different. So we are both far away from our statutory goal, far away from the Paris Climate Accords goals, far away from what we need to be doing in order to make the impact that we need. However, with the Essex Plan, this is what is forecast. So it would have, it could have a huge impact on reducing our carbon pollution. So this is where we get to your action and next. So we've heard some about the legislative priorities already. The other piece around legislative priorities to know, if you don't already, is that there is a climate committee that is both House and Senate, and there's about 40 members of that climate caucus, I should say. And this plan is one of the priorities that folks are looking at. So really looking at how to move this forward, how to address carbon pollution pricing so we can reduce it and have a policy in place that matches the statutory goals that we are already working on. And this politics and policy, that balance of what is good and unique for Vermont as a good policy, and in a way that we can talk about it, that it can move us forward, that people understand it, that it is meaningful to folks, and that balance is a really important one, and really important one where you all come in. So, lovely picture of the State House here. Who has been? Who's been to the State House? Great, so lots of folks. What were some of the reasons that you were there?
Shut it down.
Testimony.
Shut it down, testimony. Say again?
Women's March.
Women's March,
Healthcare march,
Healthcare March,
Lobbying.
lobbying,
testimony for a local thing that was happening in Bristol.
testimony, yeah,
Youth lobby day.
Youth Lobby Day. So in that, outside the State House things, the marches of talking to each other, of really galvanizing one another and showing each other that you are all on the same page, that there are things that you believe in, and from that togetherness, perhaps that helped you get connected to have testimony, to use your individual expertise, whether that's your content area or your expertise of being a Vermonter and presenting that testimony. Galvanizing other folks of youth to not only take action now, but take action in the future as well. And then there's a couple of lobbying folks that talked about too. People that said lobbying or other people that have lobbied, what did you do when you were there?
Gave verbal and written testimony to committees on occasions.
So thinking about testimony as part of lobbying,
Spoke to our legislators.
spoke to your legislators. So one-on-one, so you, as a constituent for whatever your particular thing, location is, you reached out and had conversations with your legislators. Who else has done that? Anybody else have individual conversations? So we have like 7 hands up around that, of who has had individual conversations with their legislators about particular topics. In the State House, maybe. But that wasn't my question. So kind of overall. Anybody, does that change hands? Any more hands come up of, like you've talked to your legislator, but maybe not in the State House before? Okay, yeah. And about content, about particular policy? Yeah, because that's different because we're in the state of Vermont. You could just know the person that's elected and you could talk to them about the weather and not how the weather is changing, what they should do about it. So I bring all of that up in terms of the different ways to connect. You all have these examples of galvanizing one another and pushing that information to the electeds, of letters to the editor, comments on the on comment boards. I clearly don't do the comment section on the things because I can't even remember what words they are. But galvanizing and creating creating support for particular things is on so many different levels and in so many different ways, and including just talking to each other, but talking to each other in ways that connect back. So that's very key, not only to understand particular key policies and how those move forward, but if you support them and see them as part of a meaningful way to shift the dial on climate change, then having conversations with each other, as you all are doing by being here, putting that out there in terms of letters to the editor and other media and other ways of communicating, and all of that galvanizing to communicate to legislators. Because one of the things I think a lot of people don't realize, or at least not as many people as I think we need to realize, is that it seems so obvious. It's so obvious that we need this. It's so obvious that we have to make dramatic policy changes, dramatic ways in our life in order to live. And there's lots of legislators who don't necessarily think that, or don't have the support from the people that they are representing to do it, or don't know that they have the support. So communicating to your legislators that they have your support and they have other people's support for doing actions like the Essex Plan. And I'm just going to bring it up again because it's very important. Of this balance between that the Essex Plan does, of it puts a price on our carbon pollution and then lowers the cost of our electricity. And that balance is an amazing specific piece here in Vermont that we uniquely are able to do because of the way that we have already done this amazing amount of work. And so on the individual level, people individually, their pockets get to balance out a little bit. And then on the collective level, our pockets get to balance out significantly when we reduce our carbon pollution and reduce the costs of the carbon pollution that we're right now externalizing to everyone. So that's a dive into this particular policy that, again, the Climate Caucus is one of their priorities for this coming session, and it has really strong possibilities for getting us back on track for our statutory requirements. And we need everyone to let legislators know that you support this. So that's all the little ticks in there. That's my spiel, and then we can turn this off and give back to the center.
So Ben, is this my class?
If you want it to be.
Okay, you're my class. I want the people in the second row and the third row to stand up with all the stuff they brought with them. Come on, go.
For folks who don't know, Senator McDonald is a teacher.
Oh, I thought you said what? Come on, let's go, let's go. We can't start class till you move. You take their seats. Come on, let's go. You're gonna move back there. You're gonna come here, sir. And you're gonna maybe take your hat off if I ask you.
Sounds like a teacher, not us.
Have a seat.
Take notes.
So now I want to ask the 4 people in my class, what did you think of it?
I don't know why I did that.
Ditto.
Was it such a big deal?
Okay, you're mature. I used to teach 8th grade, and I used to do that the first day of the first class. And I got, I don't care, or that was stupid, or it's okay with me. And I taught, like Rebecca Ballant, I taught history and social studies. And when we study history and social studies, we study change. And I found out that my 8th graders, and even the adults, were a little tardy in making the move. But my 8th graders have been sitting in those seats for 11 minutes. And I said, when we study history, we take a look at where change takes place, because that's tough. They didn't want to move, they'd been there for 11 minutes. I said, try owning slaves for 200 years and being asked to get rid of them. People don't like change. And when legislatures are asked to make change, they know people don't like change. And there has to be some pretty damn good reasons why it happens. Now, most of the people here today, I'd say they're believers in the gospel of going after fossil fuels and going after wasteful, expensive, destructive, unhealthy energy policies. That's what you're here for. And what are legislators up there for? What are we up there?
Represent us.
Yeah, we're your agents. You know, you have an insurance agent, and you want insurance, you've got one agent. Yeah. Leaders, be careful about us being leaders, because we don't often lead unless we're being pushed. And I want to give a couple examples of things that passed the legislature where there was a push. That is Paul Costello this morning, who talked about getting people together with common goals and doing and bringing out their interests and their vitality to get things done. And Becca told, her passion to change the world. Trying to get these people to change took a little bit. It wasn't a big deal. Billboard law, bottle deposit law. When it was proposed, they said, you can't do that. You can't do it. Well, they did. But when the legislature passed that, there was a push from people of all parts of society. Whether you were a high school graduate or not a high school graduate, there was a general coalescence by those who preached that gospel to get legislators to believe they were being backed up. Same thing with bottle and. Now, you want a simple thing to pass? Easy, doesn't cause a lot. I mean, it's simple. Ban plastic bags.
Yeah, right.
So why hasn't it happened?
Yeah, good question. Nobody's pushing.
Push back. Pardon?
Push back.
Yeah, go to a basketball game after there's an article in the paper, and people up and down the stands will say, "Hey, Mark, you trying to tell us what to do with our plastic bags?" I read the same thing you read in the paper. I'd pass plastic bags in a minute. Most legislators would. But no one has done the work to have the citizens come up and say, I'm tired of plastic bags. They're hanging in the trees. They're doing this. They're doing that. Let them use newspaper. Cover your newspaper. You can get up the cat litter and throw that away. But that hasn't happened. So we have the most unaffordable, unhealthy, wasteful heating policies, automobile policies, and you people in this room come in every year and you talk to the other people in this room. And then you go home. And you think that if you tell the legislators that you ought to do this, that we're all going to jump and do it. Big change this year. Carbon pricing, no longer called a carbon tax. Right? Big and bright. Put a bill in. Our governor, who last year we gave him no new fees, no new taxes, his affordability agenda, he has announced this year no new fees, no new taxes, veto, veto, veto. Ben, did you tell us that the energy efficiency charges were cut this year?
It's true.
And the benefits went to commercial and industrial ratepayers are the ones that got the cuts?
It's true.
And they're the ones that actually get the most service, the most new pumps, the most new devices, the most new, they get most of the money from the energy, and they got cut. And the homeowners up
8 cents a month, but
8 or 9% down for the two industrials, and the homeowners up at 1%. Which side of the equation would you like to be on? That's no victory. That's a step back. Efficiency Vermont is a form of taxing energy. That is, I meant to say when I opened my remarks that Vermont had the highest electric rates in New England 20 years ago. It has the next to lowest today. Why?
Efficiency.
You gave me the label, not why.
Actions we've taken through. that-
Pardon?
Actions we've taken through that.
Yeah, what did we do?
Lowered our demand.
How?
Avoided building new plant.
We taxed the ratepayer. We made life for them less affordable. Except that we went from the highest to the next to lowest. And it took about 40 years to do that. The bill only passed 15 years ago. And we went from the highest in New England to the next to the lowest. Mostly because we don't buy more poles and wires, and we don't use as much electricity, so we don't have to pay for as much electricity. Our bills, this is the most expensive area in the United States for electricity, and we're the second cheapest in the most expensive area. Our bills are in the bottom half of American bills because we don't use as much electricity. Apparently this morning, the leaders of Efficiency Vermont, the CEOs and everybody were arrested and have been taken in for theft. Hey, we used this amount of electricity 15 years ago, and 15% of it's been stolen, isn't being used. So who took it, and who did they sell it to when we weren't looking? We used 15% less electricity than we did 2 years ago, and we did it by charging a tax on our electric bills. We're great at spreading good news about what we do. Someone mentioned an historic lake cleanup bill. 28 people in the Senate got a t-shirt saying, I voted to clean up Lake Champlain. And they get to wear it. There's no money in that bill. If there'd been money in the bill, you'd see how many people earned the t-shirt. But now everybody has a t-shirt whether you did the heavy lift or not. So I've gone on longer than I should. But this group of people has to, you cannot continue to do what you do. We cannot continue to do what we do. There needs to be a broad-based discussion in towns around this state of people of different classes, which is much more difficult with internet, where you divide people by what information they get or who gets the listserv and who doesn't. And they need to come up and tell us about energy efficiency, that the Essex Plan or an Essex Plan, the Essex Plan that's modified, that, hey, they understand it, and by golly, we ought to pass it. But you can't have us come meet every year and talk about how important this stuff is and not somehow go out and go out and get the support the way they did for the bottle ban, the billboards, and what was the other one? Divestment from South Africa. You remember that one?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Divestment from South Africa. Vermonters said that was a good idea. So,
Vermont Yankee.
hmm?
Vermont Yankee.
I won't start on that. Vermont Yankee died of its own overweight partly because things like Efficiency Vermont helped drive down the price of electricity that they were losing their markets. And they made promises to fix this, and this. When they bought the plant, they didn't fix anything, and the cost of fixing it was too expensive, and they left town. So I'm done, but I'm done. Thank you.
So we have about 25 minutes left, so plenty of time for Q&A. Though I imagine this crowd being what it is, we won't get to quite every single question, and I think your hand was the fastest. So.
Awesome. So I hope I'm not letting the cat out of the bag, but I was surprised that you didn't mention a ban on new fossil fuel infrastructure amidst the new proposed legislation. I know a member of your caucus is authoring some legislation right now to be introduced. And I also know that
I mean, like no coal or oil generators?
I think it's gonna bear a lot of discussion, right? I think that the key piece is the pipeline. And I think that I'd like to also bring up that missing completely from the Essex Plan, which kind of arbitrarily focused only on fossil carbon pollution. Pollution has the impact. So methane, fracked natural gas coming into the state through our energy monopolies, cannot be exempted from the Essex Plan, right? It's been all of the current studies say we got to keep it in the ground. We came back, 40 of us Vermont builders came back from Standing Rock a year and a week ago this week, and they're saying keep it in the ground. We cannot just engineer and monkey up a marketplace that's going to get us out of the climate crisis. We've got to actually bring, I believe in the carrot and stick approach, which I think Mr. McDonald has objected to in the State House on at least one occasion. But I think that we've got to bring the stick and beat down the methane. And I think that also the renewable carbon pollution needs to be, if we do not regulate everything the same, then we're creating paths of less resistance to strengthen markets for polluting commodities that are going to continue to compete with true solutions, right? We've got to be regulating everything across the board. Are you three senators, are all of y'all members of the Climate Caucus? You are? For now. And will you all support, depending on how it goes, but knowing that it's going to be about banning the pipeline and other major utility fossil fuel infrastructure,
No.
you're going to support that bill when it comes down?
No.
But the stick's coming, Mr. McDonald.
Well, you've posed a question here.
All right, fair enough. How about you guys?
I would be, one, black or white quiz questions at debates or discussions are not usually the best way to move things
Come
forward.
on, you should have written this legislation. You
Well,
want to support it?
that full cost accounting for fuels will bring, it's all fuels, and it brings to the front numbers that will be useful to this conversation. As a matter of fact, I think it'll, if I were to prejudge the outcome, it'll show that there are many fossil fuel choices that are more expensive than the healthier renewable choices. But this is working through a process that feeds into things like whether or not a CPG is awarded, so, or whether or not the legislature gets behind a policy.
Sure.
We can take our time saying yes or no, or that depends, and that depends takes a lot longer.
Sure.
If you want to tackle fossil fuels, don't fight 3 different wars. Pick one you can win pick one you can get public support for, win it, and use it as example to go after the next one.
I
Now,
disagree
you-
wholeheartedly.
Disagree wholeheartedly.
It's-
Run for office and then go up and do it.
No, that sounds like the long way too.
Do you want
Yes, so I think, as I started talking about the Essex Plan, that it's one of many. And so I think that, one, I don't know if that bill will, the proposed bill that you're talking about, that I do know about, that is not yet a bill, not yet public, I don't know what will happen if it will get to that point. That there's, and so in terms of the, yes or no, it's very difficult to answer something that isn't, that we can't look at. And I think that we do need to tackle multiple things and need to have different ways of going to it, and that balance between politics and policy, and that we need all of you to be at multiple levels, including asking us these tough questions. So I don't have an answer because I don't have it in front of me and I don't know where it is, and I think that, so that's my answer.
I just think we need to address the corporate journal exemption for this methane pipeline that's really damaging
So-
here and elsewhere.
Let me just say one thing on that piece, and then let's move on because there are a lot of hands up here. So on, let me just address that particular piece that you just brought up again, methane and the Essex Plan or any of the other carbon pollution pricing proposals that have been put out there. So one, just to be clear, and I don't think this is what you're implying, but just to avoid any confusion, methane, as in gas that's going through those pipelines, isn't exempt from any, either that or any of the other ones. It would be taxed. It wouldn't be taxed on its life cycle emissions, which is what you're proposing, the sort of fugitive methane that escapes in the drilling process. That would
Which is
be
measurable.
which is measurable. That would be the ideal, I think, ultimately. But from where, at least, and I'm just speaking for VPIRG here, where we're sitting, it is incredibly important to get an initial price on the damage that CO2 pollution is causing. And I would also say that the Essex Plan that Representative Gonzalez laid out actually creates a path that circumvents people adopting gas entirely. If you have the option of oil, gas, or, you know, if your furnace is at the end of its useful life, you have the option of oil, gas, or electricity, and electricity is the cheapest, you're not gonna choose gas because it's cheaper than oil. You're gonna choose the cold climate heat pump that's cheaper than either. So that is a big part of why we think the Essex Plan has some real merit. But let's move on to other
Can I
questions.
clarify, are you saying that we are taxing the oil that people used to heat their homes, but we're not being consistent on another fossil fuel and taxing the natural gas that somebody runs with?
No, I'm saying that
Or taxes the
any,
home fuel?
all
We are
fossil,
taxing the home fuel in this bill or not?
all fossil fuels brought into the state of Vermont would be part of this proposal, with a couple of small exemptions like aviation fuel. For instance, there's federal preemption there, and so you can't really do that.
But natural gas is included in the
Yes.
bill?
And under the
Okay.
current law, we do tax those
All of it,
fuels
yeah.
for
No.
certain weatherization.
No, I'm talking about natural gas being treated equivalently with fuel oil
Yes.
Yes,
according to greenhouse. It is in the bill.
yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's
I
in
thought he was
current law.
saying- I thought he was saying that it wasn't even in the bill at all. You know, I'm gonna put the pipeline side aside, but, and I do understand what you said, Representative Gonzalez, about the price might drive people away from gas. But, yeah, I mean, we need to treat it equivalently. We can't act like it's not a fossil fuel.
Yes, and that is how the
Thank
plan
you.
treats it.
Okay.
Lots of hands, I think you, and then you, and then you.
Ralph Mima, Brattleboro. I have a question for Representative Gonzalez. So I was at the EAN conference at Champaign College several weeks ago, and the Essex Plan came out with a bang. And I've been seeing a lot of promotion, webinars, that sort of thing. But there's one particular issue that may have already been resolved. I may be like the last person to even notice this, but I want to bring it up.
Yeah.
How does the Essex Plan take into consideration the creation of millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars worth of stranded net metering credits that no longer have any value because the electric bills have shrunk so much among the ratepayers that they can't use all of the net metering credits that they signed 20 and 25 and 30-year agreements to purchase? How is that dealt with?
I think, Ben, you might
Yeah,
be able
sure.
to answer that a little better.
Yeah, so one thing I would say is online on the Energy Independent Vermont's website, Bob the Green Guy's website, a few different places, you can find the whole, it's like a 12 or 15 page outline of the whole plan. One of the things that is made clear in there is that if you're, because of the Essex credits, your bill goes below zero, you get a check. So because when you saw the example bill up there, it's a separate line item. It would be money essentially held in escrow by the utilities and delivered through utility bills, but it's not actually reducing the rate. So your net metering credit would be the same, and while you still couldn't get a check for your net metering credit itself, which you can't today, you would, if you're going below zero, be able to get a check up to the full value of the Essex climate rebates that you have. So it should not create any additional hardship for current net metering customers. Jeff, and then.
First off, I want to say something you guys probably don't hear enough, and that is thank you. This is a largely thankless job. You get 100 people in the room, even who have like minds, and you're still going to get people who don't agree with each other. And I know it's difficult to make decisions and listen to them. So thank you. This question is for you, Senator Bray. On the yeah.
Speak up. Speak up.
On the fuel cost accounting bill that you talk about, so it's intended to incorporate the externalities out of tailpipe emissions.
Well,
In
so
what
full
context
social
would
cost
you-
of carbon, I mean, that would be the other way to phrase
Okay,
it. So
so-
environmental impacts, climate change impacts, healthcare impacts.
So we do this to a certain extent with utility, rates and their planning, their supply side planning. We do account for some externalities, and efficiency gets an extra bonus for externalities. In what context would you use that full cost accounting for things like transportation or heating?
So the way this is structured, it's you probably all know that we have a joint fiscal office. It's kind of like our version of the Congressional Budget Office. It's a nonpartisan financial analysis group. So it says that when we're looking at a bill or a program that affects electrical generation or thermal or transportation, that we should evaluate it, not just our current budgets will show they don't ever include a social cost of carbon. So it asks the Joint Fiscal Office to examine that program and lay out a social cost of carbon. So for instance, if you were thinking about building more roads versus putting in more buses, and the road solution was not going to affect what was on the road at all, and the bus solution was maybe going to be electric buses, you might say, you might start doing some weighing out of the business as usual of continuing with the current portfolio of transportation versus shifting to more EVs, and then calculating a value for a higher reliance on electric vehicles.
So it would be within state spending decisions, is state government spending decisions? Is that
Right.
when you? Okay.
Right. So it's, and the point is that we talk about externalities all the time, but because we don't put them in black and white on any spreadsheet, they get, in the end, the process, one of those things in the State House is that if it's not in black and white between the four corners of the page, it doesn't exist. So it's got to make it into a process that's using the numbers, and this is a way to make that an expectation for every energy bill.
The Essex Plan has been created by people that care about this and have an interest in it, and it's been created, and now you're asking questions about it. That's fine. If we're going to move forward on these things, we have to do that. But we also have to do that in places other than this room. You said something that you thanked us for what?
For serving the state by taking your time and doing this job.
You are welcome. This is your time to serve the state, and they'll all thank you if you, in your local communities, take on some responsibility for some of the things that Senator Balin suggested to get discussions going. And the woman here in blue, thank you, who will then interject, look, we don't know how it's gonna come out, but by golly, we want things to be treated with some parity. That'll be the principles that come up. And then, but we can't do those things now. If you folks all go home and the Essex Plan is terrific, we're not gonna get that passed this year or next year or the year after unless we get people at home that believe it and support it.
So talk to your friends and neighbors, and the woman in purple is the next question.
So I'm concerned about the way the Essex Plan is being discussed, in part because I have a lot of concern for the solar industry, as just said. If it gets out there that the Essex Plan lowers rates, people who are beginning to think about doing solar are gonna say, oh, that's the end of solar for me. We've got to really be sure that we name these things to keep the solar industry alive. It's about rebates. And it's gotta be really clear in our presentation that this plan is not going to kill our solar industry.
And it'll be on the Essex people to say, yes, that's one of our principles, and this is how we do it, but if we discuss that today.
Those slides are difficult slides to
Yes.
fight against.
Yes.
And that's really important to have that perspective so that we can change this way it's being presented, because it is, no, I don't know, but yes, I agree.
Let me say two things briefly to that. So one is, VPIRG has been, we hear similar concerns sometimes around efficiency as far as the Essex Plan goes, and it's still early days. I mean, this was presented for the first time, I think, maybe 3 weeks ago now. But I would say, if we thought that this was a deal breaker for efficiency or solar, this is not a plan that we would be supporting. And so we're still digging into the numbers and trying to understand the full implications. But in the medium to long term, because this, from an electrification standpoint, drives down the functional price of the clean fuel, the electricity, which in Vermont, again, is legally required to be 55% renewable right now, then people are more likely to adopt EVs more quickly, more likely to adopt cold climate heat pumps more quickly. And that ultimately, for solar in Vermont, should be a big net win, because people are now thinking not just, how can I get my lights and my refrigerator to be solar, but how can I get my car and my heat to be solar as well? So I think we need to make sure that we're presenting the full picture, I guess I would say. I have no idea who is next. There are so many questions.
How about over there in the corner?
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest.
Yeah. On the topic of solar, from what I understand about the net metering rules, it's currently capped at 500 kW. And I'm wondering about larger users like UVM or Vermont Law School who might want to continue to reduce their electricity from the grid and to create their own electricity, and if there's any talk to raise that cap or abolish the cap altogether.
So the community energy program I mentioned, 250 megawatts more of, it's not solar specific, but just RE in general. It's designed to run from 150 to 5 megawatts, and to address those larger, to do large projects as well as like group residential projects. And the structure is a little different. So rather than starting with a retail rate, it starts with a wholesale rate. And then it looks at values on top of that, adjusters like RECs, well sited, grid condition. Do you have associated storage with your generation? Things like that. And the goal is to create a large tranche of renewable energy at a more affordable price than current net metering does. I think part of the growing pains with net metering is that we took something that was very well designed for spinning your meter backwards at any moment and stretched it and stretched it and stretched it. And now I think we maybe got to, from my point of view, we got to a place that it's not a comfortable fit anymore. So let's design another program that fits that category you're talking about.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I just want to start with one thing, which is just to clarify, I think, because I feel like there's some confusion in the room, and then I also have a question. So the thing I wanted to clarify is about methane and gas being under throughout the life cycle and even, you know, closer to the burning tip. And that's the issue, is how to arrange the tax so that you're not incentivizing a switch to methane, away from carbon and towards methane. And I do think that's really like gonna be a key issue if we wanna actually like talk to the atmosphere in an honest way about how this is gonna work. The other thing is.
Well, let me just again reiterate that part of why this plan is a really good way to price carbon pollution is because it offsets the cost of electricity. And so it increases our green energy, our green electricity creation. And in that, again, as Ben pointed out, that will be the cheapest option. That with this switch, it will be the cheapest option to use green electricity and not parsing between the different types of fossil fuel and all the different aspects of that.
But if I can also finish, is to address that thing of clean electricity, because actually, like the basic laws of physics tell us you don't get any kind of energy for free. They all have costs, and you know we have a lot of hydro here, and hydro has its social costs. They may not be, you know, counted in Berkeley County, but on Sunday or Monday night, and there's 2 talks. There's some notices down there about impact of hydro. But I'm the co-director of an organization called Biofuels that works at the international level on energy policy and land use and forestry and agriculture and everything that's tied into the issues around biofuels. And so this tax also, and like all carbon taxes, it doesn't tax biogenic emissions. And that conversation about biogenic emissions has been going on for over a decade now, including under Gina McCarthy, who exempted all permitting processes. There's no carbon from burning trees in coal plants, for example. So if we look at what's happened in Europe, they put strong targets in place under the Kyoto Protocol, and they have been trying to meet those. And the way they have done that, if you look at the mix now, 56% of their renewable energy is from bioenergy in different forms, including exporting wood pellets from the United States and British Columbia across the ocean and burning them in coal plants, and the coal plants are subsidized for making renewable energy by doing that. Right, that's where that has gone to. And the incentives that are put in place without any kind of protections for against that incentive for bioenergy is way more dangerous than people recognize. I mean, even here in the United States, 46%, according to Energy Information Agency, 46% of our renewable energy is bioenergy. That's, you know, ethanol, and it's burning wood for electricity and industrial and commercial uses, as well as home heating. And just to also say, the issue of externalities, again, burning things is very harmful to health. It's not just burning diesel in buses or exhaust tailpipes, it's also, as we know, when there's a temperature inversion here and people are heating their homes with wood stoves, there's a huge health impact on that. The emissions panel from burning wood is actually very comparable to burning coal. There's slight differences in this, that, and the other thing, but they're not actually that different. So, I just, you know.
Yeah. So kind of what I'm hearing is that something to make sure that we keep attending to in moving the policy forward that can put a price on carbon pollution is looking at the whole package, and that when we're talking about renewable energy and green electrification, that has things that also need to continue to be paid attention to as we move forward, because there are all these different multiple levels of consideration that we need to attend to. So that's part of what I'm hearing.
Maybe calling it something like atmospheric pollution rather than carbon pollution. You know, something that covered more things.
We have time for maybe one more question, and go for it. We've got about 2 minutes left, so make it brief.
I'm a member of VPIRG's rapid response teams, and we respond to comments, most of them on Digger, and have found that there's almost like a robo response from the Ethan Allen Institute, which is the other side of the equation. And my concern is that unless we individually take the time to speak to our legislators face to face, that we're going to lose the battle of emails and commentary.
I'm would say unless you speak to your neighbors, we're gonna lose that battle.
Here, here.
I would say
It's-
both,
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah.
Okay, we now have 1 minute. There wasn't a question in there. Does somebody have one question? Go for it. Oh,
Quick question,
sorry.
you don't even, you're not sure you can answer it or if you want to answer it, but are there solar panels on the top of the State House?
No, the way it's built, that wouldn't work that well. They could put some in the lawn, and no, there aren't. The state did do about 5 megawatts of solar recently, but not all of it was sited on state lands.
The gold makes the point intended.
There's a question over there.
Go for it.
So I have a question, it's one of process and one of detail also. So it seems like the Essex Plan is already out of the gate and we're supposed to support that. What's the process for giving feedback to that? I mean, you're asking us to talk to our representatives and our neighbors, but I'm not on board with the Essex Plan yet. And one of the reasons that I'm not on board is that I deal with reducing thermal energy in homes. And I've always thought that a carbon pricing fee, or whatever we're calling it, would help us do that. I mean, we have a weatherization program right now that you wait 2 years to get a contractor there. So I think that's one of the components of this that really has to be addressed, the reducing thermal energy. Because right now, with your reduction of electricity, somebody's going to get the reduction of electricity and put a heat pump in a house that has like no insulation in the attic or a broken window. You know, we're not even. I think we have to deal with that component part of if you're requesting funds or pricing carbon pollution. Let's reduce that. I mean, more than we're doing right now.
And just, I think I want to, there's 2 points that I'm hearing in that. One, how do I give feedback on this particular plan, or, and you can extrapolate that to anything, any proposed bill that's out there. How do you engage with folks who are legislators to change and have input? And then secondly, this question of, or not question, but comment about increased heat pumps without insulation is a terrible idea. My spouse is a contractor, does deep energy retrofits in buildings, so I get to hear a little bit about that from the technical side. Yes, terrible idea. And this is one of many plans. This is one of many ways in to have energy coalesce behind and take action. That the big coalition of people that came together to put this together have got to this place after multiple conversations and balancing of that politics versus policy conversation or slide that I had up there about what is the, how can we move one thing forward at a time, and knowing that we need to have multiple things at the same time. And so, so in terms of this is a proposal that is not even yet a bill yet, because this was put together by business makers, business leaders, and advocates and community members. And so just as any way to contact legislators and give input on, yes, I think this is a good idea, I think this is a good idea, but, or I think we need to do such and such, we also need to fix it in this way. We also need to add to have other bills in this way. And so that's also what I'm hearing in this conversation of, this is good, and other things need to occur as well.
So unfortunately, our time is actually up. I want to thank all of you for taking the time and for all the great questions. And like I said, we didn't get to all of them, but I hope we got to a majority at least. I just want to echo, I think, 2 things very briefly that I heard from our other panelists. So one is piggybacking off of what Representative Gonzalez just said. I would love to see a piece of legislation passed that solved the climate crisis and every other problem that we have in front of us. That would be our dream, right? Like or barring that, solve all of the energy and climate problems, even if you're not going to deal with all the other myriad problems we have. The reality is, given limited time, each individual piece of legislation is going to make progress but not be enough. And we need to fit the jigsaw puzzle together. And so I'd say Essex or appliance efficiency or community solar or building energy labeling, these are all pieces of a much larger puzzle. And I would encourage you to give feedback to your legislators on the things they're considering, but to also keep in mind that they have a lot of things they want to advocate for this year and other things that they can advocate for in future years. So not letting the perfect be the enemy of the advancing the ball in the near term. The second thing, and the last thing I'll say is, I think Senator McDonald is absolutely right, and I think our other panelists are absolutely right. We need to not just talk to our legislators, although that is absolutely essential. You all are the folks, probably the 300 people in the state who have the best understanding of how critical that is on energy and climate issues. So please talk to your legislators. Also talk to your friends and neighbors. Go to local community meetings, go to the local Chamber of Commerce breakfasts and the Rotary clubs, and convert the next ring out and the next ring out and the next ring out, because that's ultimately what we're going to need to do. It's a both and, not an either or. So thank you for taking the time, and thank you for all the work that you do.